Hello, my name is Matthew. I'm a strategic systems consultant here at Quest. And in this video, I'd like to cover a few kind of more miscellaneous um, GPOADmin aspects of deploying GPOADmin. And specifically, these aspects come from this. GPOADmin is a pretty mature tool. It's been out in the market for years and years. And sort of aspects of its architecture that made sense maybe 5, 10 years ago make less sense, but they're still supported. So I'd like to really tackle a few things today about decisions that you have to make when you first install GPOADmin that can have big ramifications over how well the product works in kind of a modern way. So the first of those is the data stores. So GPOADmin has two different data stores that it relies on. It has what's called a configuration store. The configuration store has the configuration of most of the configuration of the product. There's still some that are specific to each server that are stored in the registry. But overall, if you set an option in here or create a role within the delegation section here, those are going to be created within the configuration database. The actual backups, the actual versions of the version controlled objects, such as GPOs and OUs and scripts and all that, those aren't stored in the configuration store. Those are stored in, you'll see it referred to as the backup store or the version control store. You can kind of use both. Again, in the software, it often refers to it as the backup store. So in modern deployments of GPOADmin, there are really two correct choices. You should use SQL for your configuration store, and you should use a file system for your version controller or backup store. So there are other options. If we right-click here and choose Reconfigure Version Control Server, you can see that there are sort of three options that are available to you. There's EDLDS and Active Directory, and both of those are actually really the same thing. One of those is just designed to go against an EDLDS server, and one of those is designed to go against a domain controller. Active Directory is never recommended. This is kind of a legacy type of thing. It is the lowest in performance, and it doesn't even offer the sort of availability benefits that you might suspect Active Directory does, because you're always going to be pointing to a domain controller in here. But essentially what this does is it creates a container within the system container, right? Creates a container within within Active Directory where it stores, again, all the history and metadata and all of that information. EDLDS is a little better because you can add EDLDS, the EDLDS server itself onto the GPOADmin server, so it is more local. And obviously there are performance benefits there, but from a structural standpoint, it works in the same way. SQL is superior to both of these. SQL has been designed pretty recently. I think it came out in version 5.13. Maybe wrong on that, but it is relatively more recent. And that has really allowed some rethinking to how the configuration store works, and specifically in mind to kind of modern performance demands where there's just a lot more access checks that constantly go on because security's gotten more and more granular. So SQL Server can scale really, really high. You can use everything from SQL Express all the way to Azure Managed SQL. They're all supported. GPMC has very broad support there, and it doesn't have to be particularly large or performant SQL Server either. Just the fact that it is SQL is what you need. So thing number one is choose SQL for your configuration store. The second thing is the backup store. So if we take a look here under the storage tab, you'll see backup location, and that just gives you the category. Again, we have some choices. You can use a configuration store location. So this is basically would be like, okay, wherever we are storing the configuration stores, we're going to store backups there. That could even allow you to store them in Active Directory. Definitely not recommend that. You could use EDLDS. So personally, I don't have any customers that leverage this. I do know that it is an option in the past, but these last two are the more practical choices. We generally suggest network share. So network share can be an ordinary like server share, or it can be a DFS, namespace abstraction with replication, so show choose. And if we take a look at what's in there, we can see that there's a top level folder for each of the domains that you're covering with GPOADmin. And inside of there, you're going to see a lot of folders with GUIDs. Those are just the general registered object. And inside each of those, you'll see a zip file that contains each of the each of the versions of the group policy. If we open one of these up, you can see that it looks very similar to a GPMC backup. All these general settings, including a readable GP report if you're ever interested. SQL Server works well. You generally set this up as a separate database. There's a SQL creation script that you can use, but there doesn't tend to be a lot of advantages to it. It's mildly slower than a file system because essentially what you're doing is you create a table and those zip files get translated into just a great big sort of binary that gets shoved into the table. The one advantage to that is that can mean that there's really only two things that you need to worry about backing up, and they're both in the same platform. So as long as you back up the configuration store in SQL and the backup location in SQL, then you can have essentially full recoverability. Whereas if you use the network share, you need to have both the SQL backup from SQL plus a file system backup. But beyond that, there's really no advantages to using SQL. And there's a very slight performance disadvantage as well. So that is one sort of piece of legacy debt that I wanted to talk through that you have to decide when you first set up GPOADmin. You get kind of locked into, so it's really important to make the appropriate decisions. There's one other as well, piece of legacy capability. And in this lab, I don't even have it installed, but there is another client to GPOADmin that is packaged as a GPMC snap-in. So this is designed kind of if anyone has experience with Microsoft's Advanced Group Policy Management console, it's designed in much the same way where you can start up group policy management. And in addition to this view, there's a little tab down here that switches you into basically a GPOADmin based view, which allows, like versions to show up in here. The capability of the GPMC snap-in is significantly less than the full client. And that gap continues to grow version after version, which is why I realized that we have it to support customers that still leverage it, that it's been around for quite a while. But for any new implementations of GPOADmin, I highly urge just not even installing that and just going straight to the GPOADmin full client to get the full capability, because there's just too many strange things with the GPMC snap-in. For instance, if you create a GPO, there's no concept of the containers in here, so it just ends up in the root of the version control root. So it basically makes kind of the container structure meaningless. However, if you do have a container structure, the permissions within the GPMC snap-in will abide by those. So it gets really confusing, like what's going to work, what's not going to work, what's going to happen. My advice is to just simply not install that. So yeah, those are just a couple of things that kind of come from the history of GPOADmin and my recommendations for a successful deployment. Thank you.